Hello, and thank you for taking the time to watch my most recent scope review video. Today we're going to be taking a look at a new LPVO 1:6 from Vortex. If it looks like a Strike Eagle, that is because they are very, very similar. The difference between this one, which is known as the Siren 1:6 by 24 second focal plane rifle scope, is that it has a daylight bright VMR-MOA reticle. Let's see if there's a picture of it on here. There we are. And if it looks familiar, that's because it is the exact same reticle that they put in the Vortex Viper PST 1:6. So basically they've taken a Vortex Viper and a Strike Eagle, done a little bit of witchcraft, and created their version of a daylight bright budget level LPVO. And obviously they're not the first to come to market with the sub $350 price range, but this is their entry into that market. Now, in the case of this one, I actually bought this brand new off of just whatever website I found it on that had a really good price. I think it was like $250 shipped. Since then, I have been seeing them closer to that $300 mark on places like eBay and Amazon. They're not particularly common. When I looked into them on the Vortex website, they were listed under the limited distribution category of their scopes, which, you know, they have several scopes that are specific to like Academy or Shields or Cabela's, you know, that they only sell in those stores. This, I'm not sure if any retail store carries them, but they're apparently limited distribution. So what I'm going to do first is grab the box, flip it around the back here, and just kind of try to hold that steady and read a couple things off of here. Obviously, it is 1:6 by 24 millimeter second focal plane, the VMR-2 reticle with the MOA hash marks. It's got it's actually got 11 brightness settings on there, 2 of which are considered night vision, but they look too bright, in my opinion, for night vision. But I don't know night vision, so I may be wrong. Let's see, 3.5 inches of eye relief, the ubiquitous 30 millimeter main tube. It has half MOA graduations in the turrets instead of quarter MOA. And let's see, 10.5 inches long, 18.5 ounces in weight. So right there, kind of, around that 16 to 19 ounce weight range. That's pretty common. It doesn't feel particularly heavy compared to things like that guy right there, the Sig Sauer. It's actually a little lighter than that one, even though it's a little bit longer. But anyway, those are the stats. I will have a slide after I get done with this little intro that's going to have a picture of the reticle and those same stats listed, so you can take your time and read them if you choose to. This one, when I bought it, did not come with the mount, but I already had the mount handy, so I just have a OCD that requires me to put a brand, specific brand of mount, if I can find one for the same brand of the scope. For whatever reason, my brain just won't let me put swap the brands between the mounts and the scopes. It just makes me feel weird inside. But we're gonna start at the back here at the fast focus eye ring. That's all the way in. I'm gonna go ahead and spin that bad boy all the way out, which has got quite a bit of travel. So it's gonna be able to accommodate a wide range of people's different astigmatisms and eye conditions. So they're all the way out. I'm going to go half a turn in, and there's maybe just the tiniest amount of play in that thing, but really nothing to really talk about. So that's really good. So we don't want a bunch of wiggle in our rear objective. Moving forward, we see a pretty slim line rear bell. There's not a big step down from the bell to the knob of our fast focus eyepiece, which does have some pretty good serrations. It's easy to get a hold of. It moves smoothly. There's no grinding. There's no gritty sound, and the tension is enough that, it'll turn. Like if you had scope caps on there, it might turn if you bump those on something, but it's pretty stiff. I like them to be stiffer than this. I like them to be almost like difficult to turn. but there's nothing wrong with that. It's pretty good. Now, moving forward, we have our magnification ring here. We got one in the top. We have 180 degrees around the bottom side. So we have 180 degrees of rotation for our magnification ring between 1 and 6 power. It comes with this included little cattail, little nub, whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to take it out there because I actually had to put some blue Loctite on that to keep it in. The thing just kept wiggling loose as I was using it. I would just, by just simple moving it, I would come back and the thing would be finger loose. You would spin out, and I was worried that I would lose it. So I put some blue Loctite on it and put it in there, put some tension on it. So hopefully it should stay put now. It hasn't worked loose in the last couple of days since I did that, which is what you want. You definitely don't want that thing to accidentally fall out. To that point though, the threads that are in there, not very big. I would be legitimately concerned if I caught that on a barricade or a steel, beam or something like that, or coming out of a car, if you were doing drills of that type, or just dropped it wrong on the ground and hit a bench or something, I think there's a real chance you could break that off unintentionally. So I'd like to see that be considerably more robust, but it is not. So if you ever did break it off, Vortex's warranty would replace it, but you could also just get a different type of throw lever that was maybe a little bit more robust, that was an independent throw lever. Aside from that, the texture on this is pretty much identical to the texture back here. So even without it, you can turn that thing pretty good, but it's kind of stiff. Now, since I've had it, when I first got it, there was a bit of just like a, let me see if I can make it. I don't know if you can hear that, but there's just a little bit of noise that comes out of that thing. It doesn't feel gritty, but it just has a strange sound that it makes of just, there's two things in there rubbing together and they're making some noise. The tension all the way around is pretty consistent. Over here at the 6 o'clock, like right about there, it does tend to tighten up a little bit. And the same thing when you start going and then you get to about right there, it loosens up a little bit. So there's just a little bit of uneven tension in that ring. If you're going fast, you're probably not going to notice it. But if you're kind of going slow and you're just getting over here and you're not watching it because you're looking through the scope and you're getting to where you think you're at 6 power, you might not be. Might be at 5. And then your little MOA hash marks are not going to be accurate if you're using those for milling or for drop compensation. But anyway, that's the magnification ring. 30 millimeter tube, like I said. And then up here we have our elevation turret. These are very similar to the sorts of elevation turrets that you may have seen on budget LPVOs for the last 5 to 6 years. These ones are no better or worse than any of those that I've seen over the years. It has this kind of gimmicky dial here that allows you to identify where your zero is, but it's so loose that if you were messing with this, you could inadvertently push that and make it move even just a couple MOA, and then if you thought you were resetting back to 0, it may not be. So this thing to me is just, it's useless. These are the sort of turrets that while they're functional, they will let you zero. They're just the bare minimum necessity for establishing a good zero on your scope. You should put your caps on and never mess with them unless you have to. Same thing is true here. We have the same turret. Both have an up indicator or a right indicator for rotation. They also have it on the little dial piece there. I've actually seen these get broken and fall out, so that's why I'm just not impressed by them in any way. But the same thing, same little audible click. I'm going to look at these more closely here in a few minutes just to kind of give you a better idea of how they work. But they're cheap turrets. One thing I do like, on the inside of the cap, they have given us a place to store a second 2032 battery. I haven't put one in this just because I'm probably not going to keep this thing long term, so there's no reason to store another battery in there, just for fun. But it is there to allow you to do that, so that if the battery should be dead, if you accidentally leave it on and you get to the range and you notice that your battery's dead, you have a backup right there in the other cap. Speaking of the illumination, we have 11 positions. There is not a stop at the top or bottom. nor is there a stop in between, or an off position, I say, in between each level of the illumination. You just have to go back around to 0. Realistically, most of the time in bright daylight, you're either going to be at a 10 or an 11. So having to start there, you're going to go 1 bump or maybe 2 if it's cloudy. And if you're in a low light situation, maybe you might have to go up to 4. But I find that 4 or 5 is going to be good for most of your indoor low light situations. If you find that you prefer the old, the middle of the dial over there between 6 and 8, you're just going to have to roll the thing all the way around and then remember to bring it back to 0 so that your battery isn't dead, a week from now when you come back to it. Because that battery is only going to last, tens of hours. It's not even probably hundreds of hours of battery life, just because of the actual amount of brightness that it gives you, which is daylight bright. That battery's not going to last very long if you leave it on unintentionally. So then moving forward, get here to the front, we have our 24 millimeter objective. It's set back in there a pretty good distance so that there's, low likelihood that you're going to actually get something in and scratch it or bang on it. So that's good. This scope did not come with any caps. It's a real bare bones, minimalist kind of packaging. It's the standard kind of box that they put for the Strike Eagle. And you get your 2 pamphlets, one for the scope itself and one for that VMR-2 MOE reticle. If you get one of these, you can go through it. I'm not going to take the time to go through it now because it's just like any other scope. It's just going to give you the basic functions and statistics or specifics of the scope, which you can also look up online. Both those manuals are available in the PDF format on Vortex's website. What else? If you do go to look it up, the number that you're looking for is SRN1601. I don't know if that's going to focus on there. Let me try to fix that. There we go. So there's your part number, if you want to look that up. But other than that, I'm actually really pleased with the scope so far. But enough of me rambling. We'll go ahead and look at the reticle and the turrets after that. I have a setup here behind the scope to look at our reticle. If you are familiar with the Vortex Viper PST 1-6, then you may already be familiar with this reticle. In the Siren, they've decided to put the MOA version of it as opposed to the mil radian version of it, but they essentially work the same. They're just a basic milling hash mark reticle. On this particular version, the small hash marks are going to be 4 MOA, and the large hash marks are going to be 8 MOA. So on the horizontal 3 and 9 o'clock positions, we have a total of 16 MOA of markings, and on the vertical, we're going to have 24. There's really not much else to say about the reticle other than just to note that it is quite fine line-wise. They've done a good job bringing in those heavy stadia lines at the 3, 6, and 9, but then left the center to be more fine for accuracy. I'm going to go ahead and turn this light off and show you guys the illumination real quick. The illumination is currently off, and I'm going to go from low to high just so you get an idea of how the steps are graduated. There are no stops or off positions in between the individual illumination settings, and there are 11 total settings. So there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and the 11th setting. So in a dimly lit room like this, anything above about a 7 is really going to start to bloom pretty badly, but it does get quite bright. I'm going to leave that on just as I turn the light back on, just so you can see it contrasted against a bright white backlit. And there, the 11th setting is still visible with our brightly lit white background. And that is then back to the off position, which you can go all the way around in either direction. There is no stop at the top or the bottom. Other than that, I think we will go ahead and take a look at the turrets. I'm going to go through these turrets pretty quickly. This is the elevation turret, obviously. It has a nice low profile cap, which actually has really nice, what do you want to call those? Knurling. Yeah, we'll call it knurling. Caps are nice. They stay low. They have good knurling. They're easy to get on and off. The turrets are completely unremarkable. They are the same kind of turrets that Vortex has been putting on their LPVOs for quite a while now. Other manufacturers use turrets that are extremely similar. I will say that they have pretty good serrations on there. You can definitely get your fingers on there, get a hold of them. They're not slippery. But I'm going to quickly just give this a little turn so you can hear the clicks. So the audible clicks are pretty good. The tactile sensation of the turrets is basically non-existent. You're definitely going to have to listen for those clicks if you're going to try to count them, because you're not going to be able to really feel any difference from one click to the next on the graduations. Let's see what else. Half MOA adjustments per click, and you get 44 MOA of adjustment per rotation, which should be more than enough for whatever zero you're trying to get between 36 and maybe 300 yards, however you choose to set this up. I highly doubt you'll use more than one rotation. If you do, there is a free spinning disc that's inset inside the turret up here that does roughly allow you to return it to zero, but it's really just there for aesthetic reasons. It doesn't really provide you anything as far as tactile or tactical ability to dial, which you wouldn't really do with a scope like this anyway. But that is the elevation turret, and we will go ahead and go and look at the windage turret. I have this moved over here on the right side of the scope to take a look at our windage turret. It is a cap that is very similar to the elevation cap, except that it is slightly taller because it has an accommodation inside for a second battery for your illumination, which is a nice little extra because the battery life on these types of optics is never very good. Usually in the tens to maybe hundreds of hours. It has the exact same knob with decent serrations on there for you to grab a hold of when you're making your adjustments. And as far as the audible and tactile sensation of the clicks, they're more or less identical to the elevation. They are nice and audible. You can definitely hear them even with ear pro in at the range. If you're paying attention, you will be able to hear them if you're trying to count clicks, but there is essentially no sensation between those individual adjustments as it goes from one click to the next. It also has the free-floating little re-zero dial on the turret, and that's about it. They do what they're supposed to do, and you're going to be able to zero your rifle and then put your turret back on and leave it alone until you need to adjust it for some reason in the future. Not going to spend any more time on that than this. I think we're ready to go out to the outdoors and have a look through the scope. Here we are, out here to take a look at our eye chart at 50 yards. We've got us starting here at 1 power. The illumination is maxed out at 11. That would be the 10. That's the 11. Anything below 10 in this lighting condition is probably too dim, so we will just leave it maxed out. Go ahead and zoom us in. Take a second here to tighten up this throw knob. That thing keeps coming loose. And then we will see how this looks at 50 yards on our chart. With the reticle focused and the fixed parallax that we have, there's not really anything to complain about here. We don't see a lot of chromatic aberration. We don't see a lot of flare coming off of that sun reflection there on the wheel arch. And while maybe we could ask for a little bit more absolute sharpness, we can definitely make use of this reticle. We can make our suppressed chicken. We can see our individual playing cards, the jokers and the aces and the 2, 3, 4. I'm going to go ahead and just adjust this brightness down just a little bit. We're starting to get a little sun. That's going to help that. So there you go. Just a little bit of less brightness washing out that page. And we can see just how much more clarity we get out of that image. Again, there's our illumination. It looks very fine there. I can tell you to the naked eye, it actually blooms out a little bit more. It is more apparent. But in this situation, the camera is kind of sitting on that a little bit, making it look smaller than it does to the naked eye. Yep, we got our color scale there on the left side. We got full accurate representation, all of those. And we can even make out those individual 6.5 Creedmoor bullet holes in the bullseyes. It's really doing a great job. Back this out, we're going to look at our 1x field of view, and I'll say that at the 50-yard line, we're getting a nice, good image out of this thing. We will go ahead and move it out to the 100 yards and see how it looks at that distance. I've got a setup now to look at our eye chart at 100 yards. We're going to start here at 1 power, and I will turn on the illumination to maximum brightness, where we can see that it doesn't pop out particularly well against that white paper. But that's to be expected. Go ahead and zoom in now. I'm going to adjust some of these settings real quick just so we get as true to life image as we can, which is about right there. The sunlight behind us right now is kind of washing that out just a bit, so I'll fiddle with those settings just to make it more accurate to what we see with the naked eye. Turn that illumination off for a moment. And what we see is that we can make out quite a bit of detail on our chart. Move us just a little bit to the right so we can see our chicken. And we can make out both bullseyes, the red and the blue and the yellow. Our color scale there on the right side looks very nice. When we look at those letter scales, or the letter lines, we can make out the first 2 lines of letters and really maybe just the first line of numbers. The ones below that are getting a little blurry, as is the case with our playing cards. They are not particularly sharp, but the rest of the image, even the trees and stuff in the background behind the pile of gravel, is looking pretty good. Those trees are at 161 yards, and our gravel pile is at 140 yards. So all in all, very usable image. If you were using this for just plain old target shooting, your reticle would clearly not be obstructing much of those 8-inch bullseyes that we have out there. Definitely be able to make those out easily without obstruction. And that is really what we want. But I'm going to go ahead and pan back here to 1 power, and I'm going to go ahead and shift us from left to right and just take a look and see how the transition of that building does between in the view and out of the view, and just the general sharpness of that building, which is going to be right at 40 yards on the face here. And those benches are going to be at about 35 yards, 30 to 35 yards. It'd be helpful if the sun and the clouds would get together and give us a consistent brightness, but they do not seem to be cooperating with one another today. Turn this up just a little bit. There we go. Yeah, so if we watch that roof line and the gravel there at the base of the building, and they're right in front of us at about 15 yards where the grass line is. We're getting a very smooth transition with minimal shift. Now when you're using this scope and you're not quite lined up perfectly, there's going to be more fisheyeing than you're seeing here. So don't assume that no matter what you do when you're behind this thing that you're not going to see any fisheye, because you will. But when you're lined up well, it's going to present you with a very nice image. As we can see with that red illuminated center point, in those dimmer areas it really does start to pop. And on an overcast day like today, I can tell you that while it looks very fine in the reticle there because it's only as big as the lines are, to the naked eye there's a little bit of bloom, and it appears, you know, to be approximately the same as maybe a 2 MOA red dot, whereas here we're looking at a very, very fine dot, but that's just because of the camera trying to balance everything out. But that being said, I think we'll go ahead and transition out to the floodplain and have a look at some things at longer distances. So the first thing we're going to look at out here on the floodplain is going to be our 310 yard rules and regulations signs. I'm going to start out here at 1 power. I'm going to go ahead and put this brightness on, which is at maximum. There's a 10, which is still visible. 9 is just sort of daylight red, and then 8 out in this bright daylight is you can see it, but it's really not doing anything for you. Really, you're going to be at this 10, at the 10 or the 11 setting, most likely the 11 setting. That's going to give you the most obvious red dot that you'd be looking for. But I'm going to turn that off for a minute. First thing I'm going to talk about is just the overall flatness of this image. We do see a little bit of the pulling at the edges where the image is not super sharp, especially like up there at maybe the 2 o'clock position where you see those trees getting out there towards the edge of our field of view. But overall, where you're going to be focused at in the middle of the image, it looks really nice. So we'll take this up to 6. We notice we don't see a tremendous amount of loss of brightness until we get right there to that top of there. And there's just a little bit of dimming, but it's not terrible. And as far as our signs, I mean, they look really good. There's no real bad chromatic aberration coming off the side of them. They're not legible just because we don't have enough magnification, but we can definitely tell that there are words on them, and the color difference between the white ones and the yellow ones is very clear. Even on the individual white ones, we can separate those individual signs from one another. And the other thing that looks good is our white PVC pipe that is there to the left of our row of signs. Also doesn't have a whole bunch of chromatic aberration coming off it on the lateral directions either. If we take our attention over there to the brown sign backer, we can make out those sheets underneath there in the shade. So everything is really looking pretty good. We have a fair amount of detail up there in the tree line right behind our area regulations. The one thing I will point out, and it's just mostly an issue of camera placement, is up there in the top left edge of our field of view. We do see a bit of a distorted image, and that's going to be true all the way around the glass. If you just have your head, or in this case the camera, positioned slightly out from center, you're going to see a little bit of fisheyeing here at the maximum magnification. It's just going to be the limitations of the glass. It's not bad. We can just see it in this particular instance where the camera is placed. I'm not going to move it because it's a pain in the butt to get it back in position, but I wanted to give the scope the best chance that I could, so I have put quite a bit of effort to try to get this centered really well behind it in our field of view so that we can minimize that off-axis or off-center chromatic aberration that tends to creep in with LPVOs when you're not right behind them perfectly. If you look by contrast to that, down there at the bottom left where we see those bits of grass, those tall pieces of tan grass, while they're not in perfect focus because they're only at about 100 yards away as opposed to the 310 yards of our sign, we can still make out a fair amount of detail in that area there, those little dandelion puffs that we can see down there in the grass. And while they're not clearly defined puffs on those dandelions, we can still see them there. And the same is true as we get out there to the back of our field of view at, oh, let me see what it is. At that tree line at 385 yards. Again, things aren't perfectly sharp, but we are limited with our fixed parallax. But overall, the scope's doing a very nice job giving us a useful image. And I'm gonna zoom, or excuse me, I'm gonna pivot just slightly to our right because there are some trucks sitting over in this parking lot, and they give us a good chance to look at some high contrast between that white body and the tint of the windows. And we see that those are also looking pretty darn good. If we pan just ever slightly further and look at our trailer sitting behind them, even with the low contrast between the trailer and the tree line behind it, we can still make out the spare tires sitting on there, the jack, the individual bumpers for the boats, and the individual holes in that tire, or excuse me, that trailer wheel. So I mean, really just doing a pretty good job for a scope that costs under $250. I have no complaints. Go ahead and turn that illumination back on just so you can see it contrasted against something that's a little bit darker, like those trees back there, and it pops significantly more than it did against those white papers. But I think I have done enough here at this point, and I will move us out to look at our first building, and we can try to get some more idea of what this scope is capable at that distance. All right, here we are looking at our first building out there at 300 and, let me refresh my memory, 331 yards. That's to the brick building. The power pole next to it with the transformers is at 325 yards. And then the first power pole that we see just to the right of the building is at 235 yards. And just for reference, the tree behind it is at 275. So we go from 225 to 275 to 325 to 330 yards. Those are the distances to those things that we see right there adjacent to our building. One other point of reference, if we're talking about our depth of field here at 1 power, is that the edge of the road on the far side is at 35 yards, and where those dry sunflower stalks start is going to be at about 65 yards, and then that large patch of tall grass, the tan grass out there, is going to be 175. So everything from 35 yards out there to 330 yards, and the trees line behind it, the berm, is at 450. So really useful 1x here, where we're just getting everything pretty sharp. And the other nice thing about this particular reticle is that even at 1x with that fine crosshair, you're not going to be covering up large amounts of any target that you're shooting at. It's not going to be obstructing those targets terribly. But let's see what we look and see here. Got some bugs trying to land on my scope. So now we are at full 6x magnification. As you notice, as we got past, as we started to get in there, about there's 2, 3, we start seeing that sort of fisheye creeping in until there's a bit of fisheye. Let me see if I can work on that real quick. Nope, that fisheye is just going to stay the way it is. That's what I was talking about there at the when we were looking at the regulation signs out that tree that was up in the right corner. You do just see a bit of that roll off. If we just, well, I don't know if that helped or not. Maybe just a little bit. Anyway, let's focus on the building itself, since that's really what we're here to look at. And with that, we can see a whole bunch of fine detail in that brickwork. And we can even see up there, just on the right upper roof of the building, our antenna and our little heat vent there at the top. We can see the heat vent is there on the left, just below the roof line. You can see those individual baffles of that vent that comes out of the building. And we can make out the individual power lines coming off the building and going out to our transformer. And then, unlike some of the previous LPVOs I've looked at, while we can't read the red 75 sticker on that center transformer, we can definitely see that there is a red sticker there. And we are getting just a very, very nice image out of this scope right now. And I can tell you that with the naked eye, this is accurate. You know, the brightness that we're seeing, the level of detail that we're seeing, the lack of chromatic aberration, all of that is the same as I see with the naked eye. Some of that on today's particular day of filming is because we're starting to get some clouds creeping in behind us and blocking the sun. So that's going to help minimize those chromatic aberrations that we might see if we were getting some direct sunlight. But I'm going to move ever so slightly over to the left and get this reticle aligned with our transformer, just so that we can see how much of that transformer and those small elements up there at the top, particularly the insulators, that our reticle is going to try to obstruct. And if I can just get it tight without moving too much. There we go. So if you were shooting at, say, beer can sized objects like those transformers are, or excuse me, those insulators are on the top of those transformers, the crosshair is beginning to obstruct them somewhat, but not to the degree that you wouldn't be able to use your lateral hash marks as reference. Mostly because if you had this zeroed at, say, 50 or 100 yards, you actually wouldn't be lined up on those perfectly. You would be just slightly above them in the area of that first small hash mark, or in between, in between the main stadia line and that first hash mark, at which point you would still be close enough to those lateral hashes to use them for accurate wind, which is one of the reasons that I really like this particular reticle. I wish the vertical reticle had a little bit more of a BDC elements like we see in the SLX Nova reticle, but overall this is a very useful reticle, especially if you were doing just 50 to 200 yard zero, and you could use those hash marks to hold for wind all the way out to 3. If you were, say, looking at something the size of a full silhouette, which would be about the same size as one of those transformers, you could easily just reference the hash in the middle of it and then be able to use the horizontal stadia for your winds without any trouble. All right, I think it's time to go out to our 500 yard building and see how it performs at that distance. So here we are looking at our last building for today at 500 and I think it's 25, let me check, 555 yards. The power pole, the brown power pole right in front of the building is going to be 355 yards, and the tree line behind it will be at 615 yards. The mound of tan grass there at the left side at 250 yards, and then just the front edge of that road that we can see there at the bottom of our field of view is still at 35-ish yards. Let's go ahead and get this illumination turned on so we can see it again. All right, we have an overall good field of view, nice and flat here at 1x, and we'll go ahead and crank it up. And because of our dimness of our overcast day that we're now experiencing, I am going to adjust this brightness ever so slightly just so we have a more accurate view of what you would see with the naked eye, which is right there. And what we're presented with is a nice image. Again, low chromatic aberration, the depth of field between that tan grass right there at the bottom left edge, which is at the, remind myself again, I think it's at 275 yards, 250 yards, and our tree line all the way out there at 615 yards is all looking pretty good. We don't have quite enough detail to really pick out those individual bricks on that building. I will say with the naked eye, when you're focusing on the building, you actually can make out those lines of bricks, especially when there's more light. But in this situation where we're with a fixed parallax and we're having to kind of do a best of both worlds situation where the reticle is sharp and the building is as sharp as it can be, we're still presented with a very nice image that if you were taking shots at that distance, you wouldn't be looking at a fuzzy target while you were focusing on your reticle. I mean, even in those handrails and the stairs going down there on the right side of the building, we're doing pretty good. As I speak of the sun, it decides it's gonna maybe try to make another appearance before the clouds really set in. So if I have to adjust this brightness down a little bit in a minute, I will. But for now, I think we're gonna go ahead and let it ride. So I will move just a little bit here to the left because I want to focus on our power transformers, since those happen to be approximately the size of a silhouette target. And you can see that our reticle is still fine enough that it would not fully obstruct that target. Adjust this up a little bit because we wouldn't be looking at it dead center in the crosshair. We would probably be 500 yards. You're looking at 8 to 10 MOA depending on your caliber, so you're going to be up in about this area. And at that point, we see where the lack of useful wind holds in the vertical stadia comes into effect, because now you're just going to have to be doing some triangulation between the MOA drop that you need and trying to line it up vertically with those hashes on the horizontal stadia. And at this distance, if you were competing or shooting, or your competition or whatever you're doing had some aggressive full value or even half value wind, you're going to be struggling more than you would be if you had a scope designed for, a BDC with wind holds. But that's the trade-off. This is a very fine reticle that's going to be very fast when it's close up, but it does have some sacrifices when you want to go long range and you don't want a cluttered image. But overall, I'm quite pleased with the way this scope has performed, and I think you should be too. But I'm going to go ahead and zoom us back to 1 power and go ahead and pan across this field of view. I'm going to zoom us out just a little bit so we can see a little bit more outside the scope. Right there. I just want you to pay attention as things transition across our field of view from outside the scope to inside the scope, and get you an idea of the accuracy of that transition. Here we go. You're going to see a big step on this pole because it's only about 7 feet away, where it doesn't line up until it gets really centered. But then even there, it's pretty accurate. It's maybe just a little tiny bit of magnification at this distance. But then you compare that to my SUV down there, which is at about 25 yards. That's staying pretty true to scale. And even our our rungs on our steps, which are about 10 feet away, are lining up pretty darn well. Got a bug flying in my nose. Bugger. There's one on the power pole too. I think that's going to do it for now. I'm going to take this on back to the bench and give you guys my final thoughts on this one. I will see you there. It's time for me to give you my final thoughts on this Vortex Siren. I'll try to keep it short because I'm pretty sure that this video is already going to be nearly an hour long. And the first thing I'd like to say is that I am very happy that Vortex decided to make this scope. I feel like it was maybe a little bit of a look what we can do too, since the other brands like these two over here, the Primary Arms and the SIG, kind of got on the budget daylight bright bandwagon before Vortex did. Prior to this, their really only option would have been the Viper PST2. But they took that reticle and put it in the Strike Eagle. And why they didn't call it a Strike Eagle, I have no idea. They like to just do that sometimes where they create a whole new name, even though it's basically a product they already have. To keep this short and sweet, I think that this is a very good option for people who are uncertain about the 1-6 LPVO scope on their AR or other rifle, and they're just trying to get their feet wet in it and see if it's something that they're going to like. It doesn't do anything poorly. It has good glass. The daylight bright is truly daylight bright. It's not as bright as some of the other ones, which I think was probably just a decision by Vortex to have this maybe not compete quite as much with the PST as it would if it did have that daylight bright the same level as the PST, because in reality this one's doing probably 90+% of what that PST is doing, and it's smaller and it's lighter. So, you know, that right now, that's a pretty tough sell to say, hey, you should spend $500-600 on a Viper PST when this one can be had for under 400. You know, I got it quite a bit less than that, down around 250. I haven't really seen that price since then. It's usually running right about $399. It may go on sale different times of the year, you know, closer down to that $299 price range. Time will tell. But for that much of a price difference, this thing is doing a lot of things right. If I could do a couple of things and changes on this, I would do the power knob similar to what's on the Venom, with the 6 positions and a stop in between each one, or an off position. I'm just not a huge fan of having to roll all the way back around to 0 every time I want to turn it off, because too many times I forget, and then I come back a week, a month, or whatever later to a dead battery, which is super frustrating. But, you know, it's just my habit of forgetting, because I deal with so many scopes and I just forget to turn them off. What would I say? Any other shortcomings on this one? Really, for the price, I can't think of any. Obviously, if you were spending more, you would like to see better turrets. These turrets are, you know, extremely simple. They function, but that's about all you can say about them. They're not going to impress anyone. The throw knob, oh, that's the one thing. This little guy right here, I had to literally Loctite that thing in there because it kept coming loose. But now that I've put a little blue Loctite on there, I didn't go crazy with the red, but just with the blue and making it nice and tight, it has not come loose now in the last month or so since I've done that. So that's good, but that doesn't make it any stronger. If you clip this thing hard on something, I have no doubt that it would break off, because it's just a very fine thread in there. So maybe that could be improved. You know, you can take this off of here, and there are brands that make aftermarket throw levers that will go over this little bump once this is removed, and then you can have just a larger, sturdier throw lever, but that also is an additional cost. So you got to think about that. I wish they sold it with the mount. Maybe they will, like on a holiday special or something, they'll sell this and they'll include this mount. I had to pay extra for that, so again, there's just those added costs that pile up if you're trying to do that price comparison. For that point, the PST doesn't come with a mount either, so you're going to have to buy one either way. The Strike Eagle with the BDC commonly comes with a mount. I've seen plenty of sales for the Venom with the BDC that also come with this exact same mount. But I think this scope would do a really good job on a lever action or other sort of brush hunting rifle. If you're doing like a 450 Bushmaster or 350 Legend, the glass quality and the low light performance of this really do lend it to that sort of situation where you're not really going to be shooting 100 yards or more, or it'd be very rare, but you're going to be shooting, you know, inside of 50 yards on a regular basis, potentially with narrow, you know, shooting lanes, or where you have to be acting quickly. The 1 power on this and the daylight brightness are really going to help you take those shots quickly when time is of the essence. But with that finer crosshair, if you need to line up a precise shot, you can do that too. And you're not going to have any problems with that. It's going to work basically like a fine duplex for any purpose where you be shooting long distance. It's not a big heavy reticle that's going to obscure a bunch of your target. But aside from that, I don't really have a whole lot else to say about it. I like it. This is one that I seriously consider holding on to, where some of these other ones that I'm going to make a comparison video in the future, I'm just going to go ahead and sell those once I'm done with this one. But I like the idea of this one if I need to borrow it to somebody and just let them see what they think about the 1 to 6 power scopes. I think this is one that most people aren't going to be intimidated by when they get in there and look at that reticle, because there's not a bunch going on, but the image quality is very good. So this one might stay in the gun cabinet for a while. It probably gets sold eventually, but I think for now I'm going to go ahead and keep this one alongside my Viper PST, just because it gives a good comparison about where the money needs to go. And with that, I think I'm going to wrap this up and say thank you for watching this video. If you've gotten this far, please hit that like button and leave me a comment. Tell me if you have any thoughts about this that I maybe didn't bring up, or any questions. I don't mind answering questions either. And I hope you have a good day, and I will see you in the next video.